the ancient Egyptians were black. How do you respond to that?
So it's interesting because I think that that's not a very controversial statement, because certainly there were, I think it's, again, undeniable, there probably were ancient Egyptians that were black. But as we know from any culture, any state especially, maybe not culture, but state especially, any state contains a diversity of peoples. Some of them were, I don't think that's a wrong answer, but I don't think it's the only answer, is kind of a way that I would put it. It's certainly more accurate than to say the ancient Egyptians were white.
I was just about to ask you that. All right. So now let me ask you this.
Well, let me also, sorry, I should follow up on this, because of course now, as you know, you mentioned that you talked with Kara, and I'm sure that this is something that came up, but you know, we're not now talking about categories that don't have value judgments, and value judgments in the modern day, and value judgments in the modern day in ways that we, as people that don't live in contemporary Northeast Africa, might not understand. So if, for example, we were in the contemporary state of Egypt, and we said that the ancient Egyptians were black to a contemporary Egyptian, they would understand this statement as very, very differently than the way that I am understanding it as a white American, or that we perhaps are all understanding it as Americans of you know, different ilks. So there's much more hostility towards that kind of statement. And a lot of this is based on racism. A lot of it is also based on a colonial experience. So it's a very complicated.
Yeah, and for the record, whoever watches this interview, I don't know where Ankh stands as far as ultimately, but I don't know if he's going to agree with me or disagree with me. But I said the ancient Egyptians had different skin tones, ranging from dark brown to light brown, and they had different phenotypes. You know, they could look different ways, different anyway, but they pretty much are Africans. You know, at the end of the day, they could come in different shades, and they could look different way. They could look like, they could have my nose, they could have Jonathan's nose, they could have Ankh's nose. It doesn't matter. But they are basically Egyptians. So it is what it is. All right. And you see it also in the diversity of the genetic makeup, what they've found so far. You find the H4 for the woman a lot. You find R1 being the 18th dynasty. You find different genetic markers all over the place. All right. It's because different people. And this is from pre-dynastic times, because they're mixing up. It's like New York. I live in New York. New York, you got everybody. You got Germans, French, Haitians, Jamaicans, African Americans. You got everybody. I'm a New Yorker now. I'm from Jamaica, but I'm a New Yorker, you know? So that's how I look at Egypt. I don't know if Ankh would agree with that. Ankh, you want to add on?
Yeah, I always say that that the Nile Valley culture is indigenous to Africa, indigenous Africans, and depending on the ones that live closer to the Mediterranean, would coalesce more with people in the Mediterranean, and people that live closer to the south would coalesce more with people in Nubia and Sudan. It's a range right there. That's what I would say. Now, me personally, I would not use the term black people, because that was introduced during colonialism, and I feel like to capture the essence of who they was, they Africanists, right? I would prefer to call them, Africans, or what their name actually was. I think that actually leads more to us actually understanding how they live their lives and how they participated in the world around them. That would be my personal stance.
All right. I noticed in the 6th dynasty, there's usage of the term Kem by itself. I don't remember what glyphs or whatever, but I remember reading that. But let me ask you this: the term Kemet is known to us from, I think, the end of the 11th dynasty to the 12th dynasty. We see the introduction. Why would, if they wanted it to mean black people, why would they wait until the 12th dynasty to say, hey, we're the black people? Did they just get into town? And because I know it's Semitic folks, Asiatics coming in at that time a lot. I don't know about the people that's quote unquote Egyptians or natives or indigenous people coming in at the 12th dynasty. Like, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We have a new people here, Kemet. We're coming in. Why would they name Kemet if it means black people? This is us hypothetical, of course. Why would they name themselves at that time?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a response to that, because I guess I'm as confused by the leading question as you are. But I would also say you mentioned that, during the 11th dynasty, and especially during the later 12th and 13th dynasty, we do know we have a lot of kind of groups coming into Egypt from West Asia particularly. This is also something that we see as early as the pre-dynastic period. So if you look at kind of, the kind of initial kind of cultural materials from the north of the country, as opposed to the south, the south kind of, the Badari culture is, as you mentioned, the Nakada culture. This is, pretty undeniably an African kind of material culture. But if you look at a lot of the material that's coming in the north, a lot of it has very close connections with what's going on in West Asia at the time, not surprisingly. But the Egyptians during this time, this is not a foundation. It's, as you said, like this is a moment of foundation. But in this moment of foundation, in this moment of state myth making, they do not choose to kind of employ these terms. Of course, our documentation, again, this is now where the humanist in me needs to chime up and say that we can't speak in absolutes, because our documentation from the Old Kingdom is more limited than it is for other periods. So, maybe they did, but it certainly doesn't appear that way in the evidence that survives for us.
As far as geography is concerned, we definitely can't speak in absolutes. But I notice the term Kemet, whenever we have a conversation in our community, people get offended when we use Egypt. And I think Egypt, geography-wise, is totally different than what Kemet was. Is Kemet a set location, or is it the same size as what Egypt is today?
That's a great question. And we don't exactly, so to answer the question, we don't exactly know what Kemet was when the Egyptians talk about it to mean the country that they lived in. But it was certainly dramatically different from what we understand as the borders of modern Egypt today. This is probably for a variety of reasons. The first is that the idea of borders, as again, that like, you look at any map. I actually hate maps more than anything else. Like they're very helpful, but they're so misleading. Think of like how they imply kind of almost a Trumpian vision of the world, where there's kind of, this like wall, like separating everyone into their own little sphere. Not only is it Trumpian, but it's also really based on kind of, this ethno-nationalism of the 1800s and 1900s in Europe. So I think this is really kind of a damage that continues to be done to all our minds and all our possibilities by maps. Exchange across borders was always fluid. What constitutes a border was very different. I think we have, in certain periods of Egyptian history, maybe certain lines, individual lines, where pharaohs come in and say, hey, there is now a border here. But it's very clear that even this border is not fully within their control, and that they're kind of trying to impose a kind of absolutist authority or an authoritarian authority in an exchange, or in a space of exchange, where people from Egypt and people from Nubia are kind of moving across, and they want to prevent this. So this is kind of one side of it. The other side of it can go down to what Kemet itself means, which is that which is black, or the black land. And this implies probably, again, if it's not implying a skin color thing, then it's probably implying some type of connection with the black soil of the Nile and the inundation, in which case this would mean the Nile Valley. But if it means the Nile Valley, then it wouldn't necessarily mean the Eastern Desert or the Red Sea coast, where you can go and have a lovely beach holiday these days. So that would probably not have included in the borders of ancient Egypt. Even the city of Alexandria, which is today Egypt's second city, much as LA, where I'm based, is to New York. But it's when they founded it, in the Greek sources, they don't call it Alexandria in Egypt. They call it Alexandria by Egypt, or Alexandria near Egypt. So they're not even understanding the modern city of Alexandria at its founding to lie within what are imaginary boundaries of Egypt.
Let me ask you this. How do you, and this is putting on your philology hat for a minute now, how do you get the conclusion of black land based on the words Kemet?
Do I still have oh no, I had a whiteboard here from when I was teaching remotely where I draw hieroglyphs on. But the black land, it's kind of a convention, because it's very true. So there are very specific signs for land that they use, which is kind of like this long oval or long kind of like oval, more like a long line with then 3 dots under it. And this is not the determinative that we get. Instead, we get a kind of circle with a cross through it.
Right.
Yeah. And basically what this is it's determining kind of what we think of as a bird's eye view of a city. So kind of you see a city with the enclosure wall around it, and then the 4 or the kind of 2 main streets which intersect at the second. So basically this is just talking about that which is black and an urban environment of some kind.
All right. The other day I got an email, right? And the email had to do with the papyri that we were looking at earlier with Sesostris III, right? Mm-hmm. So I had some scholars look at it, right? And one of the scholars that looked at it, she responded. I'm gonna read her response, a little bit of it. She said, "Hi Garfield. Thanks. It does help because I spent almost an hour yesterday trying to find the word in those photos from that UCL. Didn't even bother to label with page numbers without finding the word. And now I know why. The word is almost entirely a reconstruction, and you can see it from my screenshot. Literally half the Kim sign and half the T sign remain in tiny fragments on the papyrus, and the rest is in square brackets, which means that it has been reconstructed by the editor. This means that it is a very poor example for the word. It could have been another word completely, or the word Kemet, Black Land, Nile Valley without the people. We will never know, right? So now let me put this on the screen, the actual image that I sent her. And I want to give you the opportunity to talk about this while we're actually recording, all right?
Sure.
Give it your best shot. I don't know if I'm trying to get you today. I don't know if I'm going to get you today, but I'm going to try. All right. You the scholar, but let me see what I could do. All right, here we go. So we have this on the screen right here, right? Mm-hmm. And what's happening is that there's a lot of circulation going around regarding these actual texts. So what she's talking about is this brackets right here in the line 4. Mm-hmm. What do you say about this stuff that she's talking about?
So again, I have a lot of kind of philological comments to make, but I think before we launch into the really complex way that I think we as not only as scholars, but also kind of just people that are partaking in the current media landscape need to think about citations and kind of evidence that we're presented, is we need to always kind of think critically of it, as kind of the scholar that you were quoting from in their email mentioned very nicely. Before we get into this, though, I would direct our attention elsewhere in the text. So if we can just move the focus a bit to the column on our right.
Okay.
Because then we can see that we do have the word clearly in line 3 and line 5.
Hold on 1 second. For some reason you froze. All right, so let me pause this.
Your programs, Garfield, remember?
Right. All right, go ahead, my brother.
So the one thing that I wanted to say before we delve into the complexities of the kind of what a restoration means and how seriously or how critically we should be thinking about a restoration, I'd also like to just point out that one of the valid kind of ways of looking at a restoration is also to look at other portions of the text. So, for example, if we're just talking about this word and whether we should believe that this word appears in the text, fortunately, our answer there is somewhat easy because it does appear elsewhere in the text. Again, if we understand the restoration correctly. So if we just are looking at the word kemetiu and we're just looking for evidence of that, if we go to, as I'm reading on your screen, plate 3, and we count down to the 3rd line under plate 3, and then the 5th line under plate 3, we see the kemetiu group written clearly without being, located in an area of damage or an area of speculation. We see it very clearly. So that's kind of one kind of anchor of certainty that we can kind of ground ourselves on. But now to go back to the actual the line that you were mentioning, which is plate 2, line 1, 2, 3, 4, line 4. So anytime you see square brackets, What this usually means is this is a part of text that is a part of an ancient text that is lost, but the area within it has been reconstructed by the editor in a way that they believe is justified. And presumably also the way that kind of others in the field would agree is justified. In this case, where if you notice that the bracket on your right is kind of bisecting both the first glyph on the top and the first glyph on the bottom. The first glyph on the top, by the way, is the biliteral K and M sign, so chem. And then the glyph on the bottom is your T, so that's how we get chemet. If it's bisecting them, that it probably indicates that some of it is restored, whereas other elements of it might be visible on the papyrus itself. So that there is a good indication, or that the editor feels comfortable enough making the restoration based on the traces that are there. However, if you really kind of, again, want to continue to dive in on this question, then the next thing that you should do is you should look for the actual hieratic text that this editor has that this editor has used to produce this hand copy. Which, if you like, I'll hold up the edition that I just happened to have.
Bring up yours, Ankh. Bring up yours.
Okay. Yeah, I want to see his first. I want everybody to see the book. That's a good book. See, I love books.
Where is it?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah. So we're dealing with this group right over here, which you can see is clearly written in the hieratic, but which there's hash marks over it. So again, this is helpful, but it still indicates that, because we don't know how the hash marks indicate damage or indicate loss, but we don't know how much loss it might indicate without looking at the picture. Okay. So now we need to also then go to the picture of the papyrus itself. And I think
all right, there you go. You put it up, Garfield.
Yeah, there you go.
Amazing.
Okay.
And if you see, I don't, know, if from where the mouse is, if you count down, that's line 1, 2, 3,
4.
Yep.
Right.
And if you can see that, in fact, the text is pretty heavily lost. Now, so then this might make us a bit more skeptical of the reconstruction. Okay. However, it is also, again, as we continue to talk about knowing and unknowing, it is also possible that the text has decayed since it was first translated. And so maybe there was more there that the editor had initially seen that is not there anymore. But you can see, if you go all the way to the right, you can maybe see what is the top of the sign below, actually.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, the a bit in between those, the little black, right there.
Okay.
So that could very well be the top of a chem sign. And then the little bit of ink down into your, right there is presumably then the flange that comes off of that sign. So that, again, looks reasonable to me. But there is considerably less there than one might expect from the reconstruction.
That's a good way. That's a good way to put it. I like that. I like a good way to put it.
That's a good one. Oh, okay. So
I say different because I'm not the scholar. I'm not the one with the PhD or the doctor behind my name.
Okay, and that's the famous glyphs. Wait. Do we have the famous one everybody likes to use? Do we got that, Garfield, with the seated?
Yes.
You got that one? Put that one up so we can really get into it. As we get into the meat of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it
real clarity.
So this is this one that we see a lot of people
fighting over. They fighting over.
They're fighting over this glyph. They're fighting.
There you go. Okay.
They are fighting.
They fight.
This is what the reconstruction, based off the reconstruction, they got. Right now, people are speaking about this in absolute, Jonathan. Like, yes, this means black people. They're stopping the video with you talking, say, you heard what he said. And they saying, hey, this is what the meaning of Kemet, black people, and they're using the cattle. Oh, before we get to this, we got to go to the cattle first. Before this,
but this is the cattle first.
Yeah, we got to do the cattle because the cattle is what they're using to say, hey, you see, if the cattle says X, Y, and Z, why don't this mean black?
I got it. I got it. When we put
I got it right here. So this saying that this means black cattle, but you brought out something earlier that this is actually a what?
Yeah, so this is a word. So if they just wanted to say black cattle, meaning male and female cattle, they would have just been able to say chem, so or chemu. So there would have been no T. You see, there's the kind of like this this initial sign, and then there's an owl, and then there's a kind of half circle. This is the half circle is the T. If they, excuse me, if they just wanted to say black cattle, there would be no T. What the T indicates is that they're talking about a feminine thing. And in this case, they're probably talking about cows, specifically female cows. So cows that are, you know, they're not bulls. So you can keep a lot of them together. They're not going to be, you know, necessarily violent, and they're not going to kind of, you know, challenge each other for dominance. They're going to be cows that produce milk, that are very, very, you know, convenient to have in a domestic context, that then when it becomes time to kind of create offspring, you just bring in a single male bull of whatever color that you want, and then kind of he mates with all the females, and then you move him away so that, you know, he's not a problem or a distraction. So I think that's how I would translate this word, as black cows or black female cattle, rather than black cattle in general.
Okay. Wow. Hold up. That changed the game totally, because they were saying this is the black cattles, as in plural. And then since this sign looks similar to the other sign, this means black people. So that's where the argument is. Mm-hmm. The argument right here.
Well, so then this is interesting here, because basically, so now we're looking at something. This is, again, it's so interesting because it gets into the complexity mm-hmm. of a language that involves both phonetics and figurative depictions. So you might look at this, you know, if we got rid of the two-seated people and mm-hmm. the plural strokes below them, we might look at this and say, oh, this means black women. But then we clearly see in the classifiers that there is both a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. So therefore, we have to understand this differently. But we still have to take the T into account. Again, if they just wanted to say black people, if they're saying a plurality of male and female individuals, then they default to the masculine plural, just as many contemporary languages do. You know, if there's a kind of a mixed group of men and women, you can use the masculine plural instead of, and you don't use the feminine plural. The Egyptian language worked the same way. But here we have that T. So now we have to take that T into account. So basically, this now, if we take the T into account, it must describe the abstract notion of that which is black. But then there are people that are said to be belonging to that which is black. So this is a word, this is a grammatical term that is in Semitic languages called a nisba. And it's basically when you take an adjective or concept and make it a noun. So instead of saying like, what's a good example? Instead of saying like the verb to be happy, you say the happy one. And you usually do this by adding a Y, which is unwritten usually in the hieroglyphic writing system because it is a weak consonant, and then additional gender or plural markers. And I think that's what we have going on here. So we have a kind of Y that is not written, and then a plural marker. The plurality is reinforced by the figure of the men and the man and the woman. So basically this means those who are of Kemet. So maybe those who are of that which is black, those who belong to it, those who are associated with it. In the most general terms, in the way that it's normally translated, in a way that I know, again, I know is causing debate, but might be Egyptians rather than black people.
Okay, that was very definitive. We won't be arguing that anymore.
Another thing too. If they're already black, why do they need to write that they're black? But hey, not me. I don't want to get.
No, I just want to get this because I'm tired of arguing. Friendships is falling apart. You said this Kemet debate will break up friendships. I heard you say it. You was like, man, it get ugly.
Kemet debate should not break up friendships. But again, it's interesting that, it's always, I think, worth asking if discussions are becoming heated. Why are they becoming heated? What's at stake here? And just being cognizant of that. And then, because usually what's at stake is not an ancient piece of evidence. It's larger kind of contemporary issues that are then informing our evaluation of the ancient evidence. So to be cognizant of those as well.
Oh, you said that right. You said that right. Can I put this up, Garfield? We got
All
that.
right. Let me X myself out.
So we got that clear. We got that clear. We good. No more arguing over that.
Hey,
okay.
By the way, as a side note, could Kemet actually mean Jamaicans? I just want to know. So
okay, I know you're familiar with this right here. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play it. This is you talking. Okay, here we go.
It's really interesting because you have so the interplay of art and text is something that obviously the Medu-Netur not only allows but encourages. So in a way, you could even think of these four cattle as being the classifiers of the words. But it's really cool here because we have like, it's like they're collecting all these, like literally a rainbow of cattle. So the bottom one is the black cattle. The one above it is the red cattle. The one above it is the white cattle. And then the one above it is sob. That means kind of multi pattern. Yeah.
Keep continue.
No, I mean it's just a really interesting example because and again, what I would say is going on here, because this is in the Temple of Ramses III. And so basically what he's trying to do, what it's in his interest of doing, is to show control, because he's the one that's holding the leashes of all of these cattle, that he's kind of, in control of all the different ethnicities or breeds of cattle, just as he is in control of all the different peoples that might live in the world.
Okay. All right. Got that. Was he trying to, were you trying to say that those cattle is equivalent to people?
Not directly, certainly not. Basically, I was trying to make a point on authoritarian control and kind of patriarchal systems of power. And what they often do is they want to, and we see this in terms of especially empires, where you want to kind of collect different things of diverse origins and kind of put your stamp on it to show your power. And so basically what I was saying is that what Ramses is probably doing here is he's saying, like, look, I am in control of all these different breeds of cattle. So some cattle that are multicolored, some cattle that are white, some cattle that are red, and some cattle that are black. And that this is comparable, not directly equivalent with, but comparable with examples of, for example, the pharaoh smiting people. And these people are kind of represent many different cultures, many different ethnicities. So I was kind of not saying that there was a direct one-to-one comparison here, but just that this is another feature of authoritarian control, where again, what you try to do is you try to first enumerate and describe the world so that then you can collect and control it.
I thought so. I thought I understood it like that, but it was the only way I could find out was to actually ask you, because there was some confusion in that, and I'm not sure it was on purpose, but it was definitely some confusion in that, and that actually helps me understand that more. So
confusion was probably my fault. I probably didn't. I heard it in my voice. I got too excited, and I probably skipped over some things.
Okay, but all right. I'm gonna live with that one, and I actually appreciate that explanation, because there's they're trying to make a correlation between black bulls, and that's why it's black people. Do you see that? Black bulls equate black people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any concrete evidence for that. I see, kind of, again, there's metaphorical connections going on here, maybe. Okay. But again, I wouldn't use the term black people. I maybe would say you can see the pharaoh collecting different kind of colors of cattle, just as he collects different ethnicities of people here, but not races of people. Ethnicities meaning kind of people that are labeled as Libyans, people that are labeled as Nubians, people are labeled that as Bedouins, but not people that are labeled as black people.
Okay, I like that. So yeah, you answered some great questions, and you cleared it up. I think that the issue was the cattle and the people and those seated people that was repeatedly saying that they was this. So now here's another issue around the word Kim. So there's said not to be actually direct evidence that would state that the black soil. So as a philologist, how do you know there's no direct evidence, but what are you looking at that would say it makes more sense to be black soil as opposed to some other things, or black people or black skinned people? What are you looking at to find these clues?
Yeah. So essentially, what I would be looking for,
Okay,
if I were looking for a term that described black people,
okay,
in general, I would be looking for the word chem, which does not have a T, so no feminine, and then is followed by plural strokes and classifiers of men and women.
Okay.
And so there are some resources online that you can kind of of course, there's dictionaries. For example, this is kind of the classic, like I'm just learning Egyptian dictionary, or I'm just learning the Medo-Neter dictionary. This is kind of where you go. There's also some online dictionaries that you can kind of look for this. But as far as I know, no one's ever kind of found an attestation of this, or an attestation of it that is frequently used and very clearly used to mean black people. I guess, and again, I think my whole larger point is that this never occurred and that this would not occur, but just simply that we don't have this. And if we do have it, we don't have a lot of it, which means that it was not really the way that the Egyptians wanted to see themselves, which is, again, I think, not surprising given the cultural context and the geographical context that they would have been located in.
Absolutely. They would have seen people ranging in skin color from day one, and it wouldn't have been unusual. I think it was unusual for colonial powers to come in and saying, oh my goodness, look at this. This is different. I could see that, but that environment where people are protected from the sun routinely for 350,000 years, that wouldn't even make sense to start separating divine. But that's how I feel about it. But I think you've answered my questions. Maybe there's one more. Maybe let me see. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this shit. Go ahead.
Actually, do you mind if I chime in? Because one of the things that we were talking about is kind of how a lot of this is related to kind of larger colonial or racial projects from the contemporary world.
Correct.
But I think we could also maybe find some ancient examples of this. But again, ancient examples that are directly connected with imperialism. So we do see kind of, and I know there's colleagues of mine that have worked on this in ways that I'm kind of going outside of my comfort zone here. Okay. So I'd encourage you to look at some of their research. Particularly there's one scholar that I was working with a few years back that has an article on Herodotus and black bodies. And then one of my colleagues in classics at UCLA is looking very much at images of enslaved black children, especially in the Roman Empire, and like in Rome in the Roman Empire. So not like in Roman Africa. And it does seem to be that I think there is kind of anytime you see this kind of colonialism, whether it's ancient colonialism or modern colonialism, contemporary colonialism, this is when you start to see some of those stereotypes, some of those kind of, this desire to kind of neatly classify a complex world into, especially a complex world that you're not indigenous to. So to oversimplify that in order to make it understandable, and then to make it consumable and to make it controllable.
So it's a great, so you can actually see a gradation to get to colonial periods for real.
Yeah, and I think you see it. You can see it in colonial periods in the ancient world too, specifically Roman colonization of Roman colonialism, which is kind of the ultimate colonial extraction of Egypt, where they literally go in, they conquer it, they immediately declare it kind of a special province, the emperor's personal province, and then they just literally suck out the resources of it to bring to Rome.
The food, the breadbasket of the world. Based off of that black soil, boy, I tell you. Boy, I tell you. So we kind of spoke earlier on how I felt that it was the black soil that actually gave sway to the culture, being one, a farming community, and two, being the breadbasket of the world. So I always felt like it was the black soil that gave them their indigenousness, you know, what they did, how they describe themselves. How far off am I when I say that? Am I far off? Am I close?
I think you're pretty close. I think this is certainly, and again, the Egyptians understood their world a lot of times in terms of dualities. And I think one of the major dualities that we find is the black land versus the red land.
Correct.
And, you know, we also see this in terms of kind of what gets a city determinative, what gets a foreign land determinative, what gets a hill country determinative. And I think you're quite right that they do associate the black land with kind of, again, a very kind of intrinsic identity of theirs. I almost said Egyptian identity, but I kind of stopped myself there. And again, the term indigeneity is interesting because I think it shows us too that in the ancient world, indigeneity did not necessarily mean that you were born at a certain place, but it means that you've assimilated culturally and been accepted by whatever kind of culture you're now a part of. And a lot of times, again, that was not necessarily the way that your skin color looked, but the cultural affectations, the way that you dressed, the way that you spoke, probably a lot of your mannerisms, maybe even the way you made love, like who knows? You know, these are all part of enculturation. So I view this as, in the ancient world, this is kind of taken as really markers of indigeneity.
Could you explain that term for me? I heard the way you explained it. I understand what it is based off of you explaining it, but I want to listen in the audience to understand when you say that, use the term indigeneity.
Sure. So again, when we talk about indigeneity today, it's a really complex term, and I think it's wonderful that it's becoming so important in scholarship and also in kind of the public imagination and the public reality. Again, given the nature of our historical era and kind of the imperative to recover voices that were suppressed for so long. But when it comes to ancient worlds and ancient cultures, I think maybe we need to understand indigeneity a bit differently. And again, perhaps maybe in the ways that it still applies today, but maybe not in the same way. Whereas the belonging to a culture was not necessarily something that was determined by birth, and belonging to a community was not necessarily something that was determined by birth, but it could be kind of, it was instead determined by your acceptance or your conformation to specific cultural norms. So for example, how you dressed, how you spoke, whether you wore, for example, whether you wore white linen, or whether you wore fabrics that were, you know, beautifully woven. One of these was very Egyptian. The other one was very un-Egyptian in the ancient world. And so that these would be part of a larger kind of, and again, also, you know, and this is now part of a speculative kind of imagination that I think is helpful to do. But to put yourself in a world, in an ancient world, you know, before there was mass media, before there were easily consumable images of different people and the different ways that different people looked and behaved, and to think about the process of transforming yourself. We almost view it now as kind of like oh yeah, you know, you can act whatever way you want, or like you can appropriate. I think the word that we use a lot now is appropriate. You could appropriate a lot of different cultures for better or worse. This is simply something that the way that we now consume media has allowed, the way that we now consume sources has allowed. This is not necessarily the case in the ancient world, where, you know, maybe all you knew were the town that you lived in and the nearby towns that you frequented, and maybe, you know, the people that were kind of coming and going from that and what they brought and what they had to say. And so that the act of assimilating to a different kind of cultural milieu, a different cultural norm, was much more difficult for them than it might seem to us.